Well, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or whatever is the appropriate, greeting for whatever time zone you're watching in. My name is Dre. I am going to be the host today for our Creator Studio weekly webinar. Um, so let's go ahead and jump in. Thank you again for those of you who have joined us before and who are back, and welcome to anyone who is new. So briefly, before we get started, here's just a quick look at some of the sessions that we'll be having coming up here in the next couple of weeks. As always, we are building on this list of sessions, and we have more than are planned currently on this, but we want to just make sure that we're not overwhelming folks with too many sessions in this particular screen. But next week, we'll be discussing ServiceNow cost center lookups using Creator Studio. This will be a use case that I think a lot of IT teams managing software and hardware budgets will appreciate, as well as Salesforce opportunity lookups on the 15th. This actually is going to be very much in line with our conversation today. So without spoiling too much, I think we should just go ahead and jump in to what we have going on today. So today we'll be discussing, generally speaking, accelerating Salesforce queries with Creator Studio. Once we get through the content of this presentation, we'll hand off to a Q&A session at the end of the call. And so share any or keep any of your questions written down as we go through this, or feel free to add them to the chat, and then we can discuss during the Q&A portion. With that said, let's go ahead and get started on the content, and we can talk a little bit about the motivation and why we want to, discuss accelerating Salesforce queries. So I want to start by sort of discussing what this webinar series is really about, right? Because we are going to be discussing Salesforce queries, but I want to sort of frame this as an introduction to almost a series of webinars that we'll be providing over the next couple of weeks that are really focusing in on building queries use cases, leveraging Salesforce as a data integration. So today we're going to be really discussing sort of how would you even set this up, what the general pattern might look like. And I will be using an op lookup as our example. I won't go into the specific API calls that we're making for this use case, just because we're going to be discussing that in 2 weeks. So instead, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the authentication aspect of this, as well as just a general demonstration of sort of what this use case might look like. Because I think, again, it gives you sort of a sense of the kinds of use cases that you would want to build using Salesforce. So the first thing I want to do is go ahead and open up the authentication guide that we have for Salesforce. So more than anything, I just want you to know that this is something that is available to you. So on our MoveWorks documentation portal, you can look through our use case guides and tutorials, and we have a section for authentication guides. This is because while creating a connector is fairly straightforward, and I'll sort of show you what that looks like in a moment, there can be quite a bit of differentiation between different, for example, OAuth flows and what data you actually need to add to your connector. And so, again, I don't want to discuss too much about how you would actually set this up in Salesforce. And so that's where this guide kind of comes in. We have this step-by-step, very, very thorough guide that sort of tells you exactly what credentials you're expecting to get out of this procedure, as well as each step. So step 1, you'll need to configure an OAuth password grant flow within Salesforce. This is part of the access setup. Step 2, we'll go ahead and scroll down, is testing with Postman. I want to mention, though, that in this step, you'll also be creating or need to create a service account that the bot can leverage, primarily so that way we can understand who has been making those calls or like where those operations have been coming from. It's sort of a logging thing, as well as just that's sort of how the OAuth flow works, right? So you'll need to have a service account in order to make this function correctly. Once you're done with all of these steps, step 2, testing in Postman, and step 1 is actually setting up everything in Salesforce to generate those access needs. We'll move on to step 3, which is integrating with Creator Studio. And this is where I'd really like to get started today. This is where I would like to stay focused. So you'll notice here that we actually have a very good description of what you'll need to have for the description, the base URL, basically all the data that you'll be filling in. We also provide example API calls so that way you can kind of see maybe how you would set this up in your use case. But let's actually just go ahead and take a look at the connector. So I've kind of set up this demo connector with some sort of what I hope are good example values, or at least pointers for where these values go. Again, I think this is where we see a lot of confusion when it comes to setting up connectors. So again, I'm just going to add a name, something like Dre's Salesforce demo. Of course, you would probably want to just name this Salesforce or something that allows you to look things up with SOQL APIs. So specifically, we're going to add that to the description, connect to Salesforce SOQL APIs. I think that this would be an appropriate name as well for the connection name. The next part would be the base URL. Of course, this is just going to be this format of your Salesforce URL. So whatever your Salesforce instance is, you would replace sort of your instance name here. Almost always, it's going to be something like this format. The next step would be the OAuth config. So this is where things can get a little bit more finicky and less clear because there's a lot of fields here that you actually do not need to use. So for Salesforce specifically, we're going to set up an OAuth to auth config connector. So we're going to select that from this dropdown. And then the grant type is going to be a password grant. So with that, that means we have to fill out these values here, the ones that I've added information. So for client ID, you'll add the client ID that you generate through that authentication guide. You'll add the client secret as well here. Then for the password grant username, this will be some sort of like, it'll look like an email. So it's going to be the Salesforce service account username. And in this case, I'm providing an example. So it would be like serviceintegration@org.com. And just so you can see kind of what that would look like, we'll erase everything. That's what you would expect to see in the password grant username. The password grant itself, password grant password, is a slightly unintuitive password grant password, I will say. So this is just how Salesforce APIs work. But you'll actually have to add the Salesforce account, service account password, as well as the security token that you generate and specified up here. So the service account security token. And the way that you input this into the password grant password is by concatenating them. So you actually add them next to each other. So it'll be the Salesforce password first, and then the Salesforce security token second. Again, why this is the case, I can't quite say. I unfortunately don't have that insight into Salesforce's auth engineers, but this is the way it works. So when you have your Salesforce password and your Salesforce security token, the expectation is that you'll enter it in something like this. You can ignore these curly brackets. These are just sort of there to show that these are variables, if you will. So you would enter them in like this. So you have password token. Once that's done, you need to add the OAuth 2 login URL. This will be largely static. This will almost always be the same. So there's really no need to double check this one. You can just paste in this exact URL. So it'll be login.salesforce.com/services/OAuth2/token. And then that's it. That's all of the data you need. So you do not need to add an OAuth 2 client authentication method. You do not need to add a response type. You don't have to add a header auth, really any of these values beyond this. These are just there so that way if you're setting up a different kind of connector than Salesforce, perhaps you do need to use these. But for our Salesforce connector, you don't need to use these. So let's talk a little bit about the user experience then that we want to build using this new connector that we've come up with. So what I'm going to go ahead and show is, again, a little bit of a sneak peek for the app lookup that we'll be doing in a couple of weeks. So this is what that experience kind of looks like, right? You'll have, your user comes to the bot. This is user initiated. So right away, again, I'm thinking that this is going to be a queries use case. And you're going to ask something along the lines of, what are the open opportunities, or who is the owner for this account, or what are the key contract dates that we need to keep in mind. Basically, whatever data that we're going to be looking up, this is going to help trigger the right use case that we want to have shown to the user. In this case, we're asking what are the open opportunities. And so the open opportunities use case triggers and is able to immediately look up and make a query to check in your Salesforce system what are the open opportunities. It's going to make an SOQL query, and it's going to return data that will ground in our Creator Studio use case later on. From here, we can configure what kind of information is going to show in that initial card, but then the user can then specify which card, which opportunity they want to know more information about, and then that'll be able to show that information. Copilot actually offers some additional sort of conversational capabilities, unsurprisingly, that I think makes this use case a bit more compelling. So our demo is going to be in the Copilot experience, which we'll take a look at in a moment. broadly, this is kind of the way that this all of these use cases are going to work, right? So you're going to have a user come to the bot and say, you know, some question that could be answered through data in Salesforce. That is then going to be picked up in Queries Workspace, or will trigger your query that you've configured. And then it will make a call to Salesforce, return JSON data that'll be grounded and mapped as part of your use case configuration. And then it'll be returned to the user. So again, in the classic experience, this is going to be a really sort of static card. In the conversational experience, this is going to define which data the bot has access to while generating that response. Again, we'll take a look at that in a moment. So before we move on here, I would like to go ahead and show sort of what this looks like when you're setting this up as your use case. Of course, we're going to start by just giving it a query label, something like Dre's Salesforce query demo, and a short description, get open opportunities. Now, these are important entries. The reason being that this will help with when we get to triggering and parameters, the bot's going to generate some possible utterances that it thinks will be relevant for triggering this use case. And the closer you get to getting these queries and short description, the query label and the short description to be relevant to what the user is going to say, the easier it's going to be for the triggering and parameters auto generation to work. Now, it's not critical, but I would say that this is important enough for triggering that you should keep that in mind when you are building your use case. So then the next step, we're going to select a connector. In this case, we're going to select the connector that we've built over here, this Dre's Salesforce demo, and we'll press next. And then we want to set up our API connection. So the fields here that are going to matter to you are this endpoint path. This will almost always be the same. This is going to be a get command because, again, we're doing an SOQL query. You can ignore headers. This is really just relevant for my demo configuration. And then we're going to go straight to query parameters. And so this is going to be the way that you can actually build your query. So this particular query that we've built today is not actually going to take any of the user's utterance and add that to the query. Arguably, you could. You could set this up so that way someone could ask, what are the open opportunities, what are the closed opportunities, or whatever states that you have configured in your Salesforce instance. And the way you would do that is by adding, we'll just say instead of, or by created date, again, this is kind of a weird way to show it, but you would just enter a query in here wherever you want that to replace the value in your query. Let's go ahead and erase that, though, because what we want this to do is do something that's fairly static. Again, this is just going to trigger the use case, and it's going to do the same thing every time for every user. It's going to check for open opportunities, and it's going to return those open opportunities. With that in mind, you actually don't have to pass an example value for the slots in order to test this, because, again, there is no value that we're actually passing. It's just a static call. So you can see the return down here of what that static call will look like. You can see this is a JSON Salesforce return, which we'll use in a moment to actually build out our call or our use case. So once we have our connection set up, we'll go ahead and press next. And we'll just give it a moment. There we go. So here we're going to go ahead and what we call grounding our API response, or in other words, setting up what data is available to the end user when they make this query. So you need to define the root element of the JSON response. In a Salesforce SOQL query, that's going to be records. The next step then is to set up an identifier and a description. What this is going to do is show up as the entry and then the description of the entry. So if we look back at our presentation here and we go to this slide, this is going to be here where it says Acme is going to be the name, and then new logo here is going to be the description. Now you can enter in any data that you'd like here for this. And so it's important that you note that this is going to be the name that comes after like in each record. So in the records list that's returned from Salesforce, you'll have a list of JSON objects, each JSON object being its own individual record. And we want to use the name of that record or the name value as the identifier. So this is, again, this word name is coming directly from the JSON. In fact, if we go back, I can sort of point it out here. Name is going to be right here. And then the description I have set up, let's see, what did I set that up as type. So then if you go back again, you can see that I'm pulling type from here. Again, this is just within the JSON object for each record. The next step is going to be what fields are coming from that record that are sort of additional. So again, you'll notice that in that original use case, you're only seeing the description and name of the record. So we want to be able to pull in additional record information, though, in case the user wants to have a follow-up question or has more information that they'd like to know about it. So in this case, I've added a created date, I've added a close date, I've added created by, and I've added owner. as well as stage. Again, you'll notice, though, that what's happening is we describe the attribute, we give it a sort of human readable name, and then we add the attribute input field from the JSON response as well. So this is going to point to the data, and then it's going to label the data. You'll notice here that we're doing some dot walking. So we're going to grab from the owner object in the JSON response the name of the owner. So that's where we get owner. Stage is going to be directly from the record at the top level of that record. So it'll come from just stage name. There's no dot walking required. Go ahead and press next. For this specific use case, we don't have any particular follow-up actions, but you could imagine how you might configure maybe an approvals flow or some type of flow that requires, once they look up a record, maybe they want to make some update to that record. This is where you would do that. We'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. And finally are the triggering and parameters. So you notice here, even with my sort of half well-named description and queries use case name, the bot's still able to come up some pretty good example utterances. And so I don't think we need to make any edits to these, but give me the open opportunities. What are the current open opportunities? Can you provide a list of open opportunities, et cetera, et cetera? I didn't create any of these, the bot did. But if you'd like to, you can always go through and edit these yourself by simply updating things and saying, okay, maybe our users are mostly going to say, what are the open ops instead of opportunities? This, would be where you would want to make that edit. And then finally, you set up launch criteria. Today, I'm only going to launch it to myself. But of course, if you do need any additional information here, we have lots of really good documentation on this. So you have options to launch to all users, options to launch to selected emails, which I would recommend for testing, blocking selected emails, which might be a final state if you want to make sure that certain users don't get access to this use case. And then lastly are launching to the users matching the rule. This would be for configuring user groups that we want the use case to be available to and not for others. Lastly, when you are ready to launch to production, simply click yes, it's ready to launch to production after you select whichever configuration option you'd like. And what that's going to do is enable analytics, so that way your use case is actually being tracked and you can measure how well things are going. So with all that, let's go back to our presentation. Running a little bit low on time, so I'll try to speed this up a little bit. But we don't have much left to talk about with this use case. So the next thing would be a demo. So just to show you sort of what this looks like, we'll go ahead and select our demo. And it's going to take me to our internal bot. And I'm just going to ask something like, get me the open ops. Again, this is not really one that was like an utterance that was pre-configured. So the bot's going to be smart enough to understand that this is going to need to trigger the use case that has similar utterances. And you can see what's going on here in the sort of logging that M8 is giving us, or the bot is giving us in this case. So it's going to search the Salesforce demo, and then it's going to return all of that data that we have configured in our demo instance. So for each one of these, we're going to see the name. We're going to see some information about the opportunity, and we can get more information if we ask for more. So let me say, can you tell me more about the Smith Labs op? And what the bot's going to do then is, again, take that information that it's just queried and then sort of summarize it for you with all of the information that we've configured as part of our query grounding exercise. So this is going to say Smith Labs opportunity opened FY25. It's a new logo, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really the end of the content of this session. So what I want to do now is go ahead and pass this off to the Q&A session. But what I want to do first is just give you some extra resources in case you need them while building similar or this use case, really whatever you'd like. So the first thing I wanted to highlight is our Creator Studio Developer Certification. This is an extremely helpful sort of class, I guess you could think of it, or set of modules that you can find in our Academy portal. And what will be included are guided training modules around setting up use cases and using the tool that is Creator Studio, including step-by-step videos that you can follow along to build some simple use cases, as well as certification, which is available for you to actually showcase on LinkedIn in case you want to publicly share your knowledge about the Creator Studio platform. Additionally, we have our documentation portal. I did reference that throughout this call, and I think we've walked through a bit of the authentication guide for Salesforce, but we also have use case guides, which each of the upcoming Salesforce use cases will follow, as well as a developer community, which you could think of as sort of a forum or a place for you to connect with other professionals who are working with Creator Studio or other MoveWorks products, as well as MoveWorks internal folks. So that would be things like product managers, engineers, CSEs like myself, really anybody who might be working with Creator Studio or with MoveWorks and implementation and things like that, setting up new features. You can connect with through the community portal.